Hey, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
And I'm not going to mispronounce your surname, which you just told me offline beforehand. So, no, I often just keep it to first names, actually. So that's cool. Okay, so Scott, I'm going to start here. Very broad question. What are you most excited about working on currently?
Oh, maybe two-part answer there.
Sure.
I'm working on a second book, my second book, which has been keeping me really busy. And it's I don't consider myself an author. It's a hobby pet project thing,
Hmm.
but my evenings and weekends go there, and I'm more than happy to. So that should be ready for a release in early April. Is kind of like where I'm targeting.
Cool.
Really exciting. It's another Bitcoin book, but quite a bit different than the Dao of Bitcoin, which I put out just about 2 years ago. And yeah, and then on the other side of my day job, in my daily life, I'm plugging away at Block Rewards here. We build software trying to figure out new ways to pay people in Bitcoin.
Awesome. Okay, so 700 different tangents we could potentially go in. But I'm glad that you mentioned writing books. I always try to, if someone I have on the podcast has written a book, I always try and read the whole thing before I speak to them and record a conversation. And I'm at like Kindle 92% of the Dao of Bitcoin. Like
Oh,
I'm
cool.
so close, but I haven't quite finished it. But I love when I come across and this is true with everyone, like everyone's life is different. And we all stumble across this thing called Bitcoin and we have a different lens on it. And it's like, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective before. Or I had no idea that that field even existed as a form of theory or study or philosophy or life. And so Taoism, as I read your book, The Tao of Bitcoin, was something I'm like, whoa, I actually realized in my lifetime I've given almost zero attention to this.
Hmm.
So what I'd love to know is like, how did you even get into that in the first place? And you touch on it a little bit in the book, but there'll be people listening that haven't read it. So it's just that came before Bitcoin. So it's like,
They did.
why was that even part of your life?
Yeah, the origin story was a book that I was given. I played basketball growing up, through all the way through university, and as the kind of levels of competition got higher and higher, the mental aspect of the game becomes more and more important. I
Mm.
was 20, 21, something like this, and yeah, just really at that point, I was really struggling my basketball career, trying to sort of level out my performance and the psychological component of it. And a coach of mine gave me this book called The Tao of the Jump Shot, which is a book about Daoism and basketball.
Cool.
And it was a book I read a few times and kept a copy forever. It really introduced me to the broader subject. A few years later, I found myself living in China and had some really beautiful experiences there. Um, with Taoist culture, and then just kind of took up over the course of the next, I don't know, 10, 15 years between then and writing the book, reading books on the subject here and there.
Mm.
And the one that I talk about quite a bit in the book was Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life by Wayne Dyer. And I was a massive fan of Wayne Dyer, and of that book. And it's kind of the book on the subject that I recommend to anybody who might be interested and looking for a really great primer or overview. Um, they really are timeless lessons, right? It's a way of viewing our part in the universe in a very you know a way that lets people um, let go of expectations and just try to participate with whatever's happening in their circumstances, or in the broader like environment of the world we all move through as individuals. And I think that it was so. One thing I think that happens with Bitcoin is, as people start to really think about it, you start to understand it better. You relate it to your own kind of personal expertise or passionate, passion areas, and for me, this was one of those. And I thought to myself, the more I learned about the subject, the more I thought, there's just a lot here. There's a lot of like great information around why Bitcoin works the way it does because of the you know um, data limit size on transactions and all of the technical components. And equally, there's a lot to be said for, sort of fundamental principles of why things work the way they do, which is really what a lot of Taoist ideas are about, right? That there is sort of fundamental underlying principle that guides all things, and everything in the physical world is kind of subject to the same rules and subject to this kind of universal law. And it makes sense to me that Bitcoin, like anything else, would be subject to those same rules.
Mm. It makes me think about, I mean, we've all researched so much when it comes to Bitcoin, but Brandon Quitten wrote a great piece about the mycelium of Bitcoin,
Hmm.
and mapping Bitcoin as a thing of nature, essentially. You're like,
Yeah,
oh, that's a cool way of thinking about it. And then, as you're pointing out, it fits in very well with how Daoism is a part of life. Um, to help people understand, like for me, when I read some of this Daoist, or start studying it and using your book as a way of doing that, it helps me feel much calmer,
hmm,
because you're immediately like, well, I'm in the situation I'm in. If I push too hard in a certain direction, then it's just going to it's not going to work like I expect it to. And it's just more this sense of peace and calm about like the journey that you're on. And that, like you already touched on, it's actually very helpful. You're like, oh, cool. Okay. Um, can you think of like you already mentioned basketball, maybe that's a good one, but what is a good example of in your life when you've actually taken this, it's a philosophy essentially, isn't it? Like set of life principles, and applied it to a real world scenario and felt
yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's every. I actually wrote the book from a very real sense of that. I, years and years later, I just unconsciously practice this in my life at all times. So this is actually
Really
how I live. So
cool.
writing the book was pretty easy because I just kind of have adopted this, and I think this way about things. And Bitcoin. This is true for me, and it's an ironic thing about Bitcoin. I think that and for many people, it's like it's the life raft. It is your reason for being optimistic about the future. It is the thing that people can really like anchor onto for the hope of a brighter tomorrow.
Mm,
And equally, like there is people who Bitcoin is the thing that keeps them up at night. It is the thing that
mm,
can't. It's the pot that can't boil fast enough, right?
mm.
It's the
The thing that
source
just
of
won't go away.
yeah, anxiety, frustration. Peter Schiff.
Mm,
And it's all of those things, and it's none of those things, which is actually another really kind of like Taoist idea,
mm,
where what people are experiencing is an internal thing. Bitcoin doesn't do anything. It doesn't. It's neither the hope beacon or the source of
mm,
frustration, right? These are something someone is kind of like unconsciously choosing to experience in a very personal way.
mm,
And yeah, so I think these lessons were helpful for me with Bitcoin, even like as I was really learning how to interact with Bitcoin. I think your first, most people on their Bitcoin journey of having a whatever meaningful portion of their own personal wealth stored in Bitcoin are kind of like going to experience a new set of emotions as they go through sort of the whatever's happening with Bitcoin's price. Could
mm,
be that you bought just before it went up a lot and you get to experience like the ecstasy,
mm,
the feeling smarter than everyone,
mm,
greed,
mm.
whatever.
Great set of
Uh,
feelings.
yeah, I mean, and I know people who bought at the top.
Mm,
Just there's the same number of people who bought the bottom, bought the top,
mm,
right? And then they had to then sit for a year or 3 years or whatever, this crushing feeling of feeling like an idiot.
mm,
This is the one time Bitcoin actually died. Now I've really screwed myself and my
mm,
future. And it's again, it's just it doesn't behave in a way like the individual person doesn't matter to Bitcoin.
mm,
It's like this impartial. It's like a force of nature.
mm,
And I think that so some of these ideas or the teachings, the tools help people um, retain a certain perspective in the face of sort of like whether things are going really great or
Mm,
bad. Like it's a little bit of like, just sitting with yourself and what's really changed. I talk about this in the book. Like, if you have a Bitcoin and it's worth 100,000 or it's worth 10,000, what has really changed? It's like you still have the Bitcoin.
mm,
So what changes your perception, your perspective, maybe your
mm,
your ability to sell that Bitcoin and buy other stuff with it. It's
mm,
not entirely nothing, but a lot of these things are self-imposed. And yeah, so Taoism, I think, is has been for me like an invaluable toolkit for all of the different challenges you meet in life, and you know, creating perspective and staying grounded and just thinking about the bigger picture.
mm. There was a section in your book when you touched briefly on what must have been your fiat career. And I think you were talking about doing enterprise software sales or something like that. Forgive me, I don't remember exactly. But the the reason it struck me was the idea of being a sales focused or performance focused position. And I
Mm-hmm.
used to be a broker for many years in the shipping industry. And when you hammer it too hard, you get burnt out. It's super simple. And
Mm-hmm.
all you're trying to do is beat the guy in the high rise tower across the road, really, like, or yourself. And the idea that you were able to fulfill that job with a kind of Daoist lens of like just basically just not pushing crazy hard and allowing other people to come to you. And you were probably very, very effective at that. Um, and it's a really almost contrarian insight to what the default position is in someone. At least if I was to use my experience, it's like it's basically the faster and the harder you go, the more you win.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, when I looked 20 years ahead of me, I was like, I don't want to be that guy. And I left and I took a different route. But um, how did that? I mean, did that make a big difference essentially when you're, and even now when you're building your business, like how you approach everyday decisions, how you're dealing with customers, how you're dealing with suppliers? It must affect everything, and it's fascinating to think through.
Yeah, totally. And I think that that particular lesson was really the one that I became most familiar with when I was playing basketball. And sport is a
Okay.
is a great study
Mm,
of like, when you're trying too hard,
mm.
when you're really
You just
forcing
don't
yourself.
hit it properly.
Yeah.
You can't. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to let the game come to you. Whatever the
Mm,
game is, right? And and I think any business is the same, and the reverse is true, right? It's not only about sitting around doing nothing and trying to let things come to you, and that's a great recipe for failure.
mm,
But it's the same recipe as trying too hard. The harder you try, sometimes the worse you can make things, right? I think
mm,
that. So yeah, I think that how I approach things in general is always kind of the same, and it has to do with sort of that middle path perspective, the idea of trying to thread the needle of the right amount of doing and non-doing.
mm,
And it's just as true in Bitcoin, right? People, want to, trade their way to more Bitcoin. They
mm,
want to, and or somebody buys a Bitcoin wallet and then doesn't look at it for 8 years, and they throw their hard drive in the landfill, and then
mm,
so there's somewhere in the middle is the right amount of like, doing and not doing,
mm,
and these things. This is the thing I think is like all these different lessons have endured for so long because they're just as relevant now as
mm,
they were 3,000 years ago.
mm.
There's just certain aspects of the human condition that never really change, and it's I think it's why they're so cool.
And that's a great segue into asking more of a historical context. So, for someone out there that hasn't ever even heard of Taoism, where does it come from? How did it start and evolve into today?
Yeah, it's a the original Taoist teachings were a manuscript of 81 proverbs that came out of the Warring States period in early China, something like 4th century, 7th century BC, depending on the record keeping of it. And the story goes that Lao Tzu, who is credited as being the author, was a sort of disillusioned with the state of China at the time, and was on his way to adventure into exile. And just before he left the country, he sort of wrote this as a parting gift. And the name Lao Tzu, it means old master. It's kind of like Santa Claus, or it's possible this person was not an actual person. One thing that I think is interesting about the origins of Daoism, there's a few things I talk about this in the book. There's sort of an overlap of this mythical figure that is behind the origin of the idea, and the Satoshi story is kind of a modern day version of that tale. And actually, the Tao Te Ching, the original Daoist treatise, was in large part a response to a dissatisfaction with governance in the time, and which is
Wow, it's
also
an amazing parallel, isn't it? Yeah.
totally, yeah, Chancellor on the Brink. And like a bigger idea in Taoism is kind of this concept I talk in the book about, reversionism, and that things kind of have a way of returning to the natural order of the way they're supposed to be. And I think that Bitcoin is, and I talk about this in the book, I think that in Bitcoin is almost like an immunological response. This is a natural course correction for a financial system that has just kind of like gone horribly awry over the period of
100
everything
years or
is
so,
cycles,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
But it strikes, sorry, Scott, I've got too many things in my mind here. It strikes me that it's not just a financial system, though, is it? Because the closer you get to looking at this thing, you realize that the ability to print money like is available today, it gets into education, it gets into media, it gets into healthcare. It's like the entire thing has been warped into these centralized systems, which are not necessarily benefiting the end user. And that should ultimately end up in reversion. Like, nature is so decentralized. Going back to that mycelium article, it's a good example of it. But
I love that article, by the way. Yeah,
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But even like some things I'm thinking through at the moment with like homeschooling, it's like, well, education used to be decentralized. Like, how does a tribe work? Well, it's not chatting to the tribe next door, figuring out how they want all their children to think. It's doing it on their own. And equally, like, the family itself is a decentralized unit from the rest of the tribe. And yeah, wow, it's everywhere in that sense. And so why was it important, do you think, for the longevity of Taoist ideas that Lao Tzu was a mythical figure? Like, it's almost important because you can't kill them, or you can't see their mistakes or their failures, because that also is reversion to some extent, I guess. Is it, you got to get it wrong to get back to reversion.
Yeah, I think the same is true for Satoshi, and it's important that we never know who Satoshi is, for the same reason. And you know, it's an idea, but if there's a real person attached to it, it's an invention, and that invention requires credit, and the credit attaches itself to the person, and and people are flawed, right? Like, there's just, so I think that, yeah, in these cases, it's like, it's just as true for Bitcoin. It doesn't matter, if it was the NSA or if it was Jack Dorsey or, whoever it was, uh, it's immaterial. And I think that as time goes on, it actually matters less. And you get thousands of years like Lao Tzu, and it really doesn't matter. The wisdom is beneficial for people all of the same. And even if we did know who he was, we wouldn't know enough about him now for it to be meaningful anyways. So, yeah, I think that, retaining the ideas in the purest form is what keeps them potent, and, keeps the signal clear.
And I really like asking this. So we are an amalgamation of our choices. Like
Mm.
this moment right now is the result of everything we've ever done in our life. And when you came across Daoism, you were looking at something and you got value from it and you applied it to your own life. And that is generally speaking how we do everything. You're like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'll take some of that. Oh, that's kind of cool. I'll take some of that. And you are a combination of all these things. Do you think there's or do you now have a lens upon the world with which you make decisions as a result? And so how do we pick and choose like where to put our attention? Or do you know what I mean? I'd love to know how
Yeah.
you kind of think through opportunities perhaps, or equally like when you look at failures in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, I think some things that really stand true for me as universal that have just become a big part of who I am are approach to conflict would be one for sure, and I talk about this notion in the book, and talking about Jason Lowery's software with Bitcoin, and that same reversion principle sort of teaches that the fastest way to get find yourself in fights is to pick fights,
Mm,
and
mm,
and yeah, so I tend to I tend to think of stress scenarios. Uh, I treat them with this principle of sort of non-action, and waiting to see how things unfold. I'm not usually the person who leaps first,
mm,
and that's been something that has been, I would say, like pretty steady in my life for the last however long ago I got that book, 25 years.
mm,
And the relationship with the present moment is the other one. So just a massive part of the teaching, I think, is our the way that life has evolved in the modern world is really designed to steal our attention.
mm,
And that's what consumerism society depends on. We need to feel inadequate about things we don't have so we can think forwards about things that we want. So we're motivated to buy those things, to pursue them, to feel like we're not good enough if we don't have them. And that distracts us, propelling us forward, and that same architecture, leaves us looking backwards at decisions we've made and where we are now, and like so we're kind of like threading this space between paralyzing anxiety about the future and regret about how things have gone up to this point, and with whatever's left we can really enjoy what's happening for us in the immediate now. And
mm,
a great example of this is like you go out to a restaurant and you see tables of friends sitting together and everyone is on their phone. Like they're not actually talking to each other. They're scrolling
mm,
or dopamine hits and looking at pictures of other people doing something that they think is more exciting than the thing that they are doing.
mm,
Right. And this is, it's like an epidemic right now. It's just the way the world works. And so, a lot of the different passages that I chose to put in the book, and this is actually what I think is the most important lesson about Bitcoin and Taoism, is that Bitcoin can be, I think, a very powerful way to remove yourself from that chronic, thinking about things that are already past or have not yet come to pass.
mm,
And the most enjoyable experiences that we have are the ones where we are just fully present in the moment. We're doing something you enjoy, you're with people you love, you're, somewhere you've always wanted to go. That's really what life is, right? And life happens in the now.
mm,
And, our financial system, this is like the real, like what you were talking about earlier about how it, cross pollinates and creates problems in all these different systems. Like ultimately, it's a time problem because, the invention of interest was a temporal transaction, right? Interest sends value through time, and it penalizes those without assets, and it lets asset rich people. Sorry, I unplugged my mic there. You're going to have to
Don't stress.
hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
You're on a great run. You talk about interest.
the invention of interest
Mm,
really transfers time from the asset poor to the asset rich, right? It
mm,
monetizes time, and it prices time. There's a great book I just finished reading called The Price of Time by Edward Chancellor.
mhm,
It's just definitely worth a read on the subject. And when we start to monetize time and treat it like a commodity, we have a finite amount of it, and we all do, or most of us, in some way or form, trade our time and we monetize our time. Um, when you start to think about money, fiat money that devalues intentionally by design, what that mechanism really does is it devalues the time that you have to trade for that fiat money.
mm,
And that process really creates a scarcity of time. We can never really have enough time. And what I think people experience in the fiat world is a sort of like ambient anxiety. It's a paralyzing feeling of like, this is what the rat race is. It's impossible to get ahead because, we're all kind of like literally running out of time as each of us marches towards our expiry date. None of us know when that is.
mm,
Um, but, on top of that, we have to deal with this, artificial and externally imposed problem that the unit of, financial time is being eroded out from underneath us. And so I think this is why, so many people in society feel this struggle that gets
mm,
kind of manifested in all these different ways. But the simplest way of thinking about it to me is the decreased amount of actual time we can spend in the present moment, where things kind of slow down and you can really, really just savor things. And so, to me, it's a problem with the price of time. And this is how the most important relationship that Bitcoin and Daoism have is that, I think properly understood, because Bitcoin effectively solves that problem of melting money,
mm,
it kind of, solves the problem of the theft of your time. And if you really have settled in on understanding what the end of the theft of your time might mean for you, then, I mean, for me, it means I spend almost no time now worrying about my financial future. Like, so any moments that I would have previously allocated to solving that problem in my mind, I just don't do that anymore. So
mm,
that's now surplus. I get to have that back.
mm,
And the same can be said for things, analyzing, I think everybody has their moment of like, why didn't I buy Bitcoin when it was $500? Because I had a friend. Everyone has a friend who told them to buy it earlier and they didn't pay attention. And, like we all have this story. Eventually you can let that go, right? It doesn't matter. The important thing is that, you know, this is a tool that has solved this critical problem, the theft of your time. And I ultimately think, you know, time is the most important thing, because what do people really actually try to do with money? Mostly, in
buy
this,
them time.
buy them time. It
Mm,
looks different for everybody, every consumer of time, right? But what people are really, I think, for the most part, shooting for is autonomy over their own time.
mm. Oh, Scott, I love it. Amazing breakdown. And so much of it feels brilliant. But to push back for one moment, And forgive me for making this about myself, but it's just so real right now. Two things. One, my wife and I, it's the start of the new year. We're really thinking about like, what do we want? And one thing that we find ourselves doing all the time is being on our phones around our children, like all the time. And it's not just because your phone's an entertainment tool. It's also a transport tool. It's also a shopping tool. It's also an education tool. It's an illness tool. It's a tool for everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, the child hurts itself, you're on your phone trying to figure it out. Those are kind of unavoidable, but equally, we're trying to homeschool. And so we've got a long list of like administrative tasks to be done. And you find yourself doing the to-do list at the same time as when you should be interacting with your child. You're like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Literally, what are we doing? And our phone has gone from being a tool that we can use to something that's using us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really going to try hard to figure out like, well, what are the parenting responsibilities and how do we dovetail between each other to like not be in that position? And because we feel like our time is being stolen, to your point. And the other is this really difficult thing that's hard to shake, which is, and I've said this before in the past, it's like, what if Bitcoin solves the wealth problem? You don't need physical real estate to pass to your kids. You don't need a company to pass to your kids. You don't need gold. You just need to keep this stuff in self-custody. If you have 5 kids, you split it 5 ways. If you split it just one, whatever, it solves the inheritance problem, which is essentially every single family I know has the same headaches around like who gets what, and someone's upset and someone's not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still so hard to live, to actually be like, oh, I've solved the wealth problem. Like what do you mean? This is an ancestrally inherited issue from father to son for generations of like, you've got to go do this shit, otherwise you're fucked. And I've personally made lots of different decisions to my father and doing something very different because I do believe Bitcoin can do that. But actually embodying that, it's really hard. And especially when I look at my numbers on a spreadsheet just posted a couple of days ago, net assets 45% down in Australian dollars terms today to 12 months ago. So 12 months ago, talk about that, that set of emotions. I was like, I've just beaten hedge funds. So see you guys. And I was like pumped. And a year later, I'm like, that's not such a great thing to read, right? And I call myself an investor, having been looking after an inheritance for 10 years. It's really hard to actually be like, no, I'm sorted. It's okay. Do you know what I mean? Because you're trying to throw off that conditioning. So have you found an effective way of doing that? Perhaps this is what the Daoism part really plays so well in. If like, actually just relax, mate.
Yeah, totally. And yes, I think, but we're all still people, right? So it's not like it would be insincere to give the impression that I'm unaffected by this too. It's
Guru Scott.
right. No, man, I absolutely have the same sort of like, hopes and desires, and that's where I think that the teachings are valuable. And like that book I mentioned, Wayne Dyer's Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life.
Yeah, that's on my
I
to read
probably
list.
read that book 30 times.
Really?
Because,
Oh, wow.
And,
Wow.
and because you're still the same person, then it's just like people who read the Bible over and over. And, there's just, I think there's always new things, new kernels of wisdom, and there are old things you can get back in touch with. And ultimately, like we're all on this individual journey. And again, like you're on this like down 45%. I mean, that's a really personal thing that relates to getting in and getting out of something, or like, it's just like a starting point, and it's all relative. The person who started buying their Bitcoin in 2013 probably doesn't care, to the near to the same extent that you do.
It's interesting, isn't it? The just the different evolutions that you go through, and each is an opportunity to grow and to learn. So how you actually apply, because information, and especially now with the ability of some of these AI tools, like information isn't the problem. You can find anything you need. The difficulty is the wisdom or even the IP that you've got to put all these different pieces together. And that's the hard bit. And so whatever tools get created in the future, it's still going to be that same problem of like, well, you've got all this stuff. What do you do with it? And I think that's where some of this mindset, personal development, spiritual work is needed, because you don't know how to put it all together. And equally why I find value in podcasts. Scott, I'm intrigued to move slightly forwards then. So you're releasing another book. How much or how little of the future book would you like to share?
Yeah, maybe not a ton just yet.
Okay,
Yeah, it really is entirely the discussion about time. And I would
cool.
say, I am a huge fan of Gigi's Bitcoin is Time. I
Yeah,
think
great
that,
article. Yeah.
yeah, it's a great piece of writing. And yeah, I'm kind of like exploring some of those ideas and trying to take them a little bit further. And hopefully what this will be is a very different kind of Bitcoin book. I think there's been so many great books written on, macroeconomics and hard money and all
Mm-hmm.
these other things. This one will be definitely more of a spiritual successor to sort of what Gigi started, I think, with Bitcoin's time.
Cool. What I really like is this idea of, it's kind of like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. This idea of consciousness and information being accessible at certain vibrations.
Mm.
And, when it comes to authoring books, you already mentioned it's more of a hobby than necessarily anything else, but it's still very much a case, regardless of if you're like monetizing it, quote unquote, but the you have to be at a certain place for that thing to become reality.
Mm-hmm.
So have you noticed over the years then that if you push too hard, to use that Daoist framework, like the book just doesn't happen? So you've actually just got to let it sit for a bit, and at some point it'll be ready. Or is there much more of a like meticulous process of like, I've got this idea, okay, this is how it's going to happen?
That's a really funny thing for you to ask. I never planned on writing a second book, and had been just noodling on different ideas, things that I started wanting to talk about on podcasts more often.
Mm.
And I was at a conference in October, and ran into somebody I know there, and she asked me, when are you going to write this book on time? And when she said that, it was just sort of like
I'll
it
do
just
it
kind of
now.
clicked, and I got back home, after the event, and started writing. And
Cool. Really cool.
yeah, so I guess these things just have a way of happening when they're meant to. And
Mm.
6 months ago, I would be surprised to hear that this is where I am now. Like I'm kind of it's quite a bigger book. Dao of Bitcoin was about 50,000 words, and I'm already at 110,000 on the
Wow.
manuscript for this
Wow.
one. So it's quite a bit of a deeper dive. And yeah.
Really cool. And one more question on books, because it's something that I've toyed with, and I've never found, to kind of summarize this in a sense, never actually sat down and done it. I've got a manuscript for a book that I wrote a year ago, but never edited and never did anything with. And I guess I just wasn't ready.
Mm.
To any aspiring authors out there, what would be the number one thing that you've learned from doing this?
Oh, good question. I think it's like again. I would probably say two things. One, I gained a lot of insight and value from hiring people to work on the book with me. Like
Mm,
professional editors,
cool.
and so like really kind of honoring the process. And yeah, I enjoyed the the end to end of it and got an immense amount of satisfaction. When other people ultimately end up reading it and some enjoying it. And, I think the other thing is that it can be scary to really hang yourself out if you think they're your ideas, to whatever extent that's kind of
Mm,
possible. And The act of like then putting them out there for anyone else to like or dislike, and the internet can be a harsh place
Mm,
of faceless critics, and that's good. Like now I'm glad that I kind of like took action on that, and I'm excited to get this next one out and see what people think of it.
mm. Really cool. And I like that phrase, take action or get action or because this is time. It's like this came up in a podcast recently with Rev Hoddle. I don't know if you know Rev, the
Yeah.
permaculture focused guy on Nostra I had on. He's awesome. But just talking about stacking capital, and he has these different forms of capital that he's working on. It's like, how can I do 2 or 3 or 4 of them at the same time? Because time is a flow. And even when you sleep, you're spending your time.
Mm.
And so, how do we figure out the ROI for our time in the most effective way? And writing a book is something that just to some people might not be an effective ROI. It just is not worth it. But all the lists of reasons you just mentioned is actually that was worth it for your time. Um, and I guess it's like, what do you get out of it rather than, because that funny process of design, isn't there? It's like, build it and they will come, do extraordinary amounts of deep market research to know you're solving someone's acute problem. And it's probably somewhere in the middle is actually the way to go. Um, but yeah, how you decide to spend your time every day is such a difficult thing to figure out. Um, and Scott, okay, so what I'd love to ask about now is block rewards.
Mm.
And so it's your business that you're building. Um, how's that going? What's the history with that? And I'm always intrigued as to like how people are actually making money in and around Bitcoin because it's
Mm.
not always very easy.
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing about building the Bitcoin world of tomorrow. Today
Mm,
is between the hyper Bitcoinized world I want to hopefully be alive to see, and today there's a bunch of infrastructure and bridges that need to get built, and I think the reality is that in the world of today, the Bitcoin world of today, Bitcoin businesses are really tricky. We're still super early,
mm,
and the general person isn't looking to pay for their Starbucks with Bitcoin. Um, I think there's a great argument. We're still sort of like firmly in this store of value phase of the monetization of Bitcoin as an asset.
mm, mm,
Um, yeah, and how long it takes is anybody's guess. So, I mean, the short answer to your question is our business is a SaaS company. So we have incentive and rewards products that kind of build the same way. Companies have been using tools like this for a long time. It's just that ours are the first ones that create a reward for an employee that's Bitcoin instead of
mm,
some other thing. And for that tool, we charge dollars. And so, um, but it's tricky. It's really tricky. I think that um, as much as when you see Bitcoin and it feels so obvious, that's the other piece I think that is really still super early. Like it's actually not obvious for almost
mm.
everybody.
No, no, it's hard. It's very
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, and it's very niche. And 100,000 or 100 million, however many people really get it, I think the number is a lot smaller actually than we think it is.
Mm.
And because I
I love
think
that question. Like, where are we
yeah,
actually at in adoption? It's
yeah,
really like some people will tell you, "Yep, already we're already there." It's like,
no,
really?
no,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, certainly
you
my
know,
day life, like, when you tune, like we've spoken about a bit, you tune out of all the noise. And when I ask people, and I'm talking to people about Bitcoin every single day, whether there's someone in a cab, whether there's someone helping you clean something, whether it's someone who's another parent or whatever, and most of the time, they don't really know what you're talking about.
yeah.
they've heard the name. Is that still a thing? Oh, right. I
Yeah.
used to buy pills with that like years ago. Like,
Yeah.
sweet, yeah, good times. But
Yeah.
it's
Totally.
it's it's a big thing, and they just don't even really know. But that's very anecdotal. When you see other people talking about address sizes and how many active wallets there are and blah blah blah, it's very hard to know, isn't it? So you reckon we're much, much, much smaller in terms of meaningful adoption than what others would suggest.
Yeah. I do think it
And I
will.
think I'm with you there.
Yeah. I think it will change quickly. I think about, and I tell this story a lot. I'm 45. When I was just finishing high school, that was kind of like the early normalization of email. So I started college and got my first email address and never checked it. Didn't have the habit of it. Nobody was really using email. It was like, this was the late 90s.
Mm.
And by the time I was graduated and in the workforce, it was impossible to have a job or a business without email. And that's what gradually and then suddenly looks like, right? Where like, and so call that sort of 5 years, 7 years, whatever.
Mm.
It went from being pretty niche to mandatory. And yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to think money printing can go on for a long time. I think we'll be using government money for a long time, but I think that the problem of devaluing money is, you're talking about states of consciousness. This is an idea independent of Bitcoin that is really, I think, undergoing a mass proliferation right now. Like, it doesn't matter where you live, things are a lot more expensive than they used to be. Noticeably, life is harder,
Mm.
and we are getting conditioned to want or have less than we used to have. And that combination of forces, I think, for a lot of people, that's going to be enough to start wondering what alternate solutions might be out there. And yeah, I think it's just, at some point people realize it's Bitcoin might make you rich, but it's not about getting rich. It's about solving this time problem and protecting what you actually already have.
Mm.
And that's when you have, like, email is cool. It made communicating with people a lot easier, but we're really talking about like a fundamental human rights issue, right? This is a basic um, component of healthy civilization, of people being able to be sane and plan for the future with certainty.
Mm.
This is a solution that for a problem that everybody is facing everywhere. So of course people are going to adopt it. It's just yeah, I think it'll look a lot different when it does. So I
Mm.
think I think we're earlier than we think, but I also actually am a crazy price bull, and I think we're at like 10 million a coin by 2030.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and if it really, well, so many comments to that. I think it's just this concept of time is so underplayed, frankly. Like, I could have jumped on the price tag there, and in some ways that's where I immediately went. But it's not about getting rich. But what you realize is your wealth isn't the dollar number. The wealth is your time. And so actually, if you have more options in your life, i.e., I choose to homeschool my kids, that wouldn't be possible if I was very much still in that broken world that I used to live in and on a fiat standard.
Mhm.
That's wealth. That's not on the fucking spreadsheet. You can't see that, right?
Yeah.
I talked through the three key forms of capital: humanistic, intellectual, and financial. And this is a typical humanistic area where, your relationships, your kids, your network, that isn't a dollar figure. It's impossible to put a number on, but it's a huge driver of value in your life, in your family, in your potential legacy, if that was a word you wanted to put on it. Um, Yeah, it's so interesting. And just to roll back to that, to block rewards, what was the genesis for the business, Scott?
Yeah.
And I love that. I always like. Sorry, excuse me. I'll finish quickly. I love seeing situations where there's not necessarily business model risk, because it's an existing market that you know people understand the thing. You're just recreating it somewhere else, kind of like when you see a good hot dog in one country and you take it to another country, right? You know someone else is buying it somewhere. So there's, as an entrepreneur, there's not as much risk in that area of the business, but you still have to focus on getting things right, of course. What was the starting point that you came from?
Yeah, so it wasn't software sales. I did 15 years in pensions and health benefits consulting.
Okay.
So I was deeply in that world when I started studying Bitcoin. I was in the class of 2020, and at the time I was managing a number of pensions as a consultant. And when the Canadian government started printing money, like they did that year, I started, you know, studying inflation and money printing, and became, I thought things would happen faster than they did, but I was really worried about fixed income and the 60/40 portfolio, sort of all these
Mm,
instruments that had underpinned all of the, products I had been selling my entire career. And, the light bulb went on for me with Bitcoin, and I thought, everybody's going to want to earn Bitcoin. The easiest way to stack, right, is earning Bitcoin instead of earning dollars. And so what happened for me is what I think happens to a lot of people. If I was a shoemaker, and I understood Bitcoin, I would be thinking about ways to incorporate that into my business. Like it's just like you said, right? Like the hot dog analogy. What I think we'll see over the next 10 and 30 years, whatever, is just a Bitcoin way of doing all the useful things that we're doing now.
mm,
It's not, everything can't be ported over to the Bitcoin world, because I think a lot of it won't be necessary in the same way. But I believe that people are still going to be paid. People will still be working.
mm,
And so to me, yeah, it was just that I happen to come from a background of a world of kind of compensation and rewards. So when
mm,
I understood Bitcoin, I'm thinking like, oh man, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do some cool stuff here with creating new ways to help people understand, why they want to trade their time. And this just happened when the 21 Jack Mahler's going public in December. They had the great billboard in Times Square that said something like, "No man should work for what someone else can print."
mm,
And I think that there just is a massive application for Bitcoin, is getting people off of working for paper
mm,
when you could be working and trading your finite time for finite money.
mm. Yeah, true that. Oh my gosh. The 2020 story resonates because I first bought Bitcoin 2015, but I didn't truly know what it was for a long time. And sold some to go on holiday, sold some more because I thought the 2017 block size wars was going to kill the whole thing. And suddenly 2020 comes around and a stock listed company, MicroStrategy Sailor's buying it. And I'm like, hang on a second, what's going on over here? And that's what I'd probably call myself as well then, a class of 2020 in that sense. Like that was the moment where I was like, hang on a second, what have you owned for like 5 years? I'm like, this is the best performing asset you've ever had. It just sat in self custody. There's no one like getting pissed off about a shower because you have an investment property. There's no discretionary manager in between who's like, here's a portfolio of crap that you don't even know what it is. It's just you in self custody and you've beaten everything else. And they're buying it in a stock listed company. What the hell is this thing? And that's what kind of kicked it off. And I guess just to reflect on, if we were both the class of 2020 and we now are on a Bitcoin standard, applying different lessons from our life to this thing, building a business in your case, or running podcasts, like that trajectory is probably going to map onto other people that are like the class of 25 or
Mm-hmm.
the class of 26 or the class of 20. Do you know what I mean? It's fascinating to think how viral adoption works like that. And absolutely, to your point, all those people want to get paid in Bitcoin and
Yeah.
probably more than likely keep as much of it as possible. And that's when I love thinking about like your habits and how your spending changes. You start to buy stuff that you actually need, not what you want, and everything changes, doesn't it? Gosh. Oh, well, Scott, listen. So an hour's flown by. Thank you so much for your time today. I just to hand it over to you. Is there anything else that you haven't touched on that you'd like to mention? And equally, if people wanted to get in touch, what was the best way to do that?
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. I'm on Twitter and on Nostr. The handle is the same, Lantern Bitcoin. And if you're looking in sort of the mainstream world or block rewards, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn as well, and at blockrewards.com.
Cool. And sorry, with block rewards, just very quickly, Scott. So, is your customer the employee that's getting paid, or the business?
The business.
Cool. Okay, so it's like a B2B play in that sense. So you've got a business. I want to start paying people in Bitcoin. Okay, I come to block rewards, and that will help me figure that out.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we're just in
awesome.
Canada right now, US in 2026.
Cool.
And, we have aspirations to get everybody everywhere else over a long enough time.
Yeah, and I'm sure you will. Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks again.